Suicide hotline operators, have you ever had calls where you thought help wouldn't reach your client in time? How did you come to terms with it? I worked at a SB hotline for about a year, and one call that comes to mind was when a caller said they didn't want to die alone but had already taken a lethal amount of pills. They said they were parked in a lot somewhere they wouldn't disclose, and the only information I had to pass off to emergency services was their phone number. I felt so worried that information wouldn't be enough to get them helped in time, but once they hung up the call and wouldn't answer my calls back, I realized there was only so much that this person allowed me to do for them, and I did absolutely everything I could with it. Being able to understand that brought me some peace. Knowing that I will be there as much as someone will let me, and I'll do the best that I can with whatever is in my power, and that's all we can do for others, and that's all we can ask of ourselves. Thank you. I feel much more at peace knowing that being at peace with doing everything I can, as opposed to being hung up over not being able to save someone or convince them otherwise, is a much better way to think. Of course, and I'm sorry that you found yourself in that difficult position. I really feel for you. Feel free to drop me a message if you ever need some support from someone who's gone through these things too. Something about this specific comment feels so sincerely genuine. I can't describe it, it just feels different from other comments like this that you see on the internet. So thank you for that. I work in ambulance communications. I was on the phone with a lady out in a semi-rural area on a very busy night for us. She had found her boyfriend hanging from a tree in his favorite park. She told me that it was his favorite place to come and sit to watch the dogs. He'd sent her a suicide text and she had just thought to look there. I spoke to her for about 30 minutes before we got police assistance. We requested fire and police since our ADA lights and sirens was 35 minutes. She had nothing to cut him down and no way to climb high enough to try and undo the rope. For 30 minutes she held him up as best she could with his feet on her shoulders. He'd been hanging for 30 minutes to 1 hour and couldn't be revived. I hope she got the help she needs to keep going from that. She did everything she could. That's the worst call I've ever taken. When I was around 14, my niece ran home from the playground across the street and said her cousin was hanging at the playground and couldn't breathe. My brother and his idiot family wasn't alarmed in any way, and I ran there to see her hanging from a strap around her neck. She tried bungee jumping, I guess, and the strap slid to her neck. I held her up just enough to breathe and cry while I was waiting for my idiot brother for a few minutes while he walked over. Unfortunately, some people are just terrible parents. Brother, I have an idiot brother like this. Seemingly you don't grow out of the stupid either. While not a suicide hotline operator, a friend called me in tears saying he had drank bleach. Obviously I didn't really know what to do, so I stayed on the phone talking to him and used someone else's phone to call an ambulance. He was alive when they got there, but he died a few hours later. Honestly, it's horrible knowing someone is dying and the help they need might not reach them in time. Not a hotline operator. When I was about 13, my best friend, at the time, called me to tell me she'd took an overdose and wanted to say goodbye. She's had a really troubled childhood and was always running away and self-harmed a lot. I talked to her for a bit to get more information and then told her I'd have to call her back because my mom wanted to use the phone. Once she'd hung up, I told my mom everything and we called an ambulance for her. I called her back and kept her talking. I knew the ambulance had arrived when she started screaming at me down the phone that I'd lied to her and broken her trust. She survived. We never spoke again. I found out years later she'd actually wrote me a letter while in hospital, but my mom never gave it to me. She'd read it and decided to throw it away. I never knew what was in it. My friend continued having a troubled life but then found God and started sorting her life out. Unfortunately, she died from heart failure a few years back. I always thought she hated me for what I did. It upsets me we never got to talk again, and I've always resented my mom for keeping that letter a secret. If your mom decided to throw the letter away, chances are your friend wrote some nasty things about you in the letter. I mean, your friend was a suicidal teenager after all. You shouldn't be resenting your mother for that letter. Edit: I originally wrote this comment under the assumption that a mother would be reasonable and wants the best for her child. However, Op has mentioned in a later reply that this probably wasn't the case. I'm sorry for what you have had to go through. My mom told me she threw the letter away because she didn't want us being friends anymore. I was just as ducked up as my friend. It just never ran away, or at that point tried to kill myself. My mom believed my friend was a bad influence and didn't like her. To me, she was my lifeline. She was the only person who got me. I wouldn't have cared what she wrote about me. I just needed to know she didn't hate me, and now I never will. My mom throwing away that letter wasn't to help me. I found out about the letter because she bragged about throwing it away years later. That's ducked up. She really bragged about throwing it away? Yeah, she wasn't the best mother growing up and did a lot of stuff that damaged me. She's a lot better now that she's older and chilled out. I feel for you there. My mother has yet to cross the line into reading my mail, but she's very much not a great person. I'm sorry you never got the closure of knowing what that letter said. Not a suicide line operator, but when I was 17 I tried to jump off a bridge. At the time I was in a psychiatric hospital and had leave where I hadn't returned. When I started to have suicidal thoughts I rang the ward where I was staying. I spoke to one of the nurses, Tony, who tried to calm me down. He was a big burly man almost 7 foot tall and built like a bouncer. While I was stood on the bridge some guys pulled over to see if I was okay. I freaked out and hung up the phone on Tony. The last thing he heard me say was duck off. The guys ended up restraining me and calling the police. The police took me back to the ward and Tony was waiting outside to take me back in. He was crying and told me that for the first time in his 15 years working there he genuinely thought he had lost someone. Tony sounds like good people. Not a hotline person, but an army medic. This always helped me and I've found it to be fairly accurate. There are 3 types of patients: those that will live no matter what you do, those that will die no matter what you do, and those that if you do the right thing, right now, they may have a chance. We're really just there for the 3rd type. The first 2 you monitor and reassure, and make them as comfortable as you can. If you as a caretaker need help, please get it. It's easy to carry it all with you. I volunteered at one for a few years. It was very rare that someone was in immediate danger. Most of the calls were people who were contemplating suicide and didn't have an exact time frame or imminent plan. You can't send an ambulance to them if it's not an immediate danger, but just try your best to talk them out of future plans. I never knew if they eventually went through with it or not. Former EMT. I remember talking to one of our 911 dispatchers who was on the phone with someone who called 911 because they were afraid they were going to hurt themselves. During the entire call they were crunching and chewing something. Eventually the dispatcher had to ask them what they were chomping on. They said it was their psych meds. I don't know how it ended, but EMS was en route as soon as they said they were afraid. For what it's worth, psych meds are designed to be as suicide-proof as possible. I'm told that it's not a pleasant experience taking too many SRIs at once. I took a bunch of SRIs once. I didn't do any research on what would actually kill me, but you're right, not much happened. I didn't feel great though, that's for sure. Edit, just thought I'd mention that by no means is it a safe or good idea to do it. I still ended up in hospital and was put on fluids. I couldn't pee for ages and was made to have a catheter. Serotonin syndrome is what happens. Having been on sertraline and also taken ecstasy, I can confirm that serotonin syndrome is ducking awful. Oh my god, please do not take ecstasy and sertraline at the same time. Also exercise caution if taking SRIs alongside tramadol, not very well known but it has serotonergic effects. Last time I tried to commit suicide I called a suicide hotline and they literally just forwarded my call on to emergency services once I told them I'd taken a bunch of pills. Unless you just want support and someone to talk to, don't call a suicide hotline. Also bonus trivia, spoke to the emergency operator and she said it would be at least 4 hours for an ambulance and it'd be better getting a taxi. I ain't an operator there, but I experienced my best friend die. It's kinda sad to remember what happened. So I was in a Discord call with him playing some games. Then he left for like 10 minutes. After he came back he was crying. I asked him what's wrong and why was he crying. He explained me that he had drank bleach. Only because his girlfriend left him. Not saying anything I called the medics. Unfortunately they didn't arrive in time. All I heard was someone fall down on the ground and silence. After a few minutes the medics rushed in. At that point I knew what happened. I was crying. And the feeling was horrible. To experience someone that was important to you die. I'm so sorry that had to happen to you. You did the right thing in calling help immediately.